Have you ever been locked in a theological conversation with one of your buds and you bring up the early church and the practices that were held in the early church as an example of early Christianity, and your friend quickly dismisses it, saying that most likely that is not true because the early church was by then corrupted? Oh, you haven't? Oh, I thought that was a universal experience inside Christianity. But if you have, or if you haven't, welcome to Contextual Christianity. My name is Daniel Donahue, and today we are going to be discussing that very question. Like I said, we are addressing the fact that the early church has in some ways been attacked and accused of tainting the kiddie pool. So much so that it is not safe for Christians to swim in their waters. Yes, the early church has been attacked or accused of corrupting Christianity. Now, this is not new. It's been around for quite a while. However, I see it quite a bit on YouTube. As I'm perusing the pages that are on this platform, I've seen a notable amount of accusations leveled against the early church fathers in an attempt to dismiss them. Why would so many people try to dismiss the early church? Why would they try to level accusations against them? And are these accusations true? And furthermore, who are these individuals or groups that are making these claims against the early church? This is the subject matter that we're going to be diving into today, and I hope that you find it interesting. So, starting with the who. Who are these people? Who are these groups? Who are those that are leveling accusations of paganism, blasphemy, and corruption against the early church? Well, I would like to say that it's actually a whole host of different groups from all sorts of different stripes and flavors. In fact, you are not going to necessarily be able to point a finger down on them and figure out exactly who they are based upon their dislike for the early church. However, there tends to be one particular thing that they all have. They're on the fringe. They're on the fringe of Orthodox Christianity. Some of them are inside Orthodoxy. I'm not accusing these people of being all out heretics. However, there are those as well. Several cults will use this tactic in order to dissuade you from attending your church and to kind of bring you into their fold. And this is true with fringe groups as well as cults and other world religions, such as Islam or atheism. Yes, atheism. I'm afraid you guys often have moral standards, even though you don't believe you do, that seem very religious. Quite interesting. So let's get into some of these groups and the specifics. Well, first you have anti-Trinitarian groups such as the Jehovah's Witnesses, Oneness, Pentecostals, and also our lovely Unitarians. They will make some pretty heavy accusations against the early church, specifically during the time of Constantine. Next, you have the Seventh-day Adventists or other groups that believe that that Christians should be under the Old Covenant law, keeping Sabbath, the kosher laws, and celebrating the feast days. And that it's kind of an important thing. And then you have even, feminist Christian groups. Yes, I didn't think it was going to come from them as well, but apparently it is. And one of the accusations that I've recently heard, it's quite a hairy accusation from this feminist organization, is that in the Middle Ages, the patriarchy, that dastardly group of clergymen, suppressed and removed all the names of the female clergy that were there that were truly historically there in the early church, because the patriarchy was able to find every single manuscript and remove it. Yes, that is something that is leveled against the early church, or at least the medieval church, that there was some corruptive element that has tainted and changed Christianity to the point that these female clergymen, women have been suppressed, thumbed by the patriarchy. Well, here's the actual thing, though. We have to answer the question, has the church been corrupted? And do these groups actually have some truth behind what they're saying? Has the church been corrupted? Well, it's complicated, actually. And it's kind of, yes. Yes, the church has been corrupted. And it was corrupted pretty early on. And the corrupting elements, in some ways, still has an effect, actually truly has an effect on us today. We can actually see the corruptive nature of things that happened back then and things that are corrupt today. So what exactly is this corruptive element? And who represents it? Well, to start, you represent it. Yes, you. The person listening in on this video, you actually represent a portion of the corruption that is found in your church. Don't worry. I do as well. I also represent it. Because part of the corruption that's taking place inside Christianity is sin nature. And as long as the church has been comprised of humans, there's been this problem of sin nature in our congregations. It's there, and I think because the church is only going to be comprised of humans, at least to my best judgment, there's going to be corruption that's going to continue. And that corruption, it's real. You're seeing it with the world and the worldly system around us creeping in to the church and pressing on to the church, trying to influence the church and its doctrines. And people that are outside of the church and become saved, they bring in certain worldly presuppositions into the church. That's true today, as it was back then during the time of the early church. But at the same extent, when I say that corruption is there, it's not really giving much favor or lending a lot of favor to these fringe groups. Because just because certain corrupting elements have slipped into the church doesn't necessarily mean that their understanding of a corruptive element was one of them. And that is the problem. We have to actually look at every single accusation and look at the historical timeline and see if it, lines up. And if it doesn't, then we have to just dismiss it as just unhistorical. And realistically, a lot of these accusations, when it all comes and boils down to it, they end up being pretty bizarre and ahistorical conspiracies leveled up against Christianity or against Orthodox Christianity in order to subvert truth. Because we have lots and lots of primary source documents coming from the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth century of Christianity. We have lots. If you include the New Testament with the first and the Didache and a few others that came on the very tail end of the first and entering the second There's a lot of information. And you literally have to say this written history has been so corrupted by later generations that we can't even trust it in order to overcome this body of literature. Now, that's what some groups actually say. Let me give you an example. And I'm going to give several examples. Let's look at the Trinitarian. So, the Trinity was first coined by Tertullian. Now, some would argue that he's using it in a slightly different way. And really, though, it was solidified in a creed by 325. And yes, that creed was ramified, or whatever that word is, it's slipping my mind. I only got 5 hours of sleep last night, so pardon. Ratified. So it was solidified when it comes to the Nicene Creed. And so those that are anti-Trinitarian are going to make the suggestion that prior to 325, there was no Trinity. In fact, that the early church did not believe that Jesus was the Son of God or God himself incarnate. They'll say that this is a tainted, perverse, pagan thought that has been introduced by that dastardly first Roman Empire that was a Christian, and in their minds, the last Roman Empire that was a Christian because he so destroyed it, that boogeyman of a man, Constantine. Yes, if this is something to hold on to. A lot of these fringe groups, Constantine becomes the big bad boogeyman of their groups, and they're going to accuse Constantine because he's a convenient scapegoat. Not a very historical scapegoat, but a very convenient one. And Constantine, with his bishops and pressuring the bishops, he changed the doctrine from Unitarianism to Trinitarianism. The thing is, it doesn't line up with history. It doesn't. In fact, I can go into a lot of the Ante-Nicene fathers and I can read the literature and I can see that they're equating the Son of God with the Father, both being of the same substance. Yes, and they actually use that word, same substance. Homoousios is used in a lot of the Ante-Nicene fathers. Now, once again, someone might level against the Ante-Nicene fathers and saying, well, that literature has been tainted, has been changed, and we cannot trust it. And if you're going to make that accusation that the literature of the early church fathers has been so tainted to the degree that all the places where it did not say homoousios and it was added later, well, then you're kind of holding the same argument that Muslims make. The thing is, they believe that the Trinity was an invention and that the Bible was corrupted by corrupted people. And so you're now accusing the early fathers, who were the ones that carefully wrote down or transcribed the scriptures in their generation over and over, made the manuscripts. You are accusing that generation of being tampered with to such a degree that it's no longer trustworthy. Yet at the same time, you're trusting the New Testament. That's the same position the Muslims have against Christians. And so realistically, you're giving fodder to Islam in terms of what they believe. Now, it's not good fodder because it doesn't actually line up with history. And when you apply Occam's razor, it even fails even more. But that's what you have to do in order to basically condemn the Ante-Nicene fathers and make it non-Trinitarian. In fact, another reason why this doesn't work is because some of that literature that was around during the Middle Ages, when the after the entire controversy of Nicaea, because it continued after the council, after it was all said and done, a lot of that literature was lost and only rediscovered recently. As an example, in 1906, we have Irenaeus' demonstration of the apostolic preaching rediscovered. And it equates the Son of God with the Father. It equates it very clearly. And he knew Polycarp, and Polycarp knew many of the apostles, specifically John. And so you have this very early manuscript that was lost to time, and it equates the Son of God with being God himself. And it's all over. And that's one of the reasons why we don't want to necessarily just vie into every little conspiracy theory that is leveled up against the church, because that's what it is. It's the same conspiracy theory that Muslims make, saying the Bible is corrupted. You just have to ask, where in the historical timeline was it corrupted? Was it corrupted right after the apostles? Like after the last one died, boom. All the church fathers and everybody that knew the apostles, they're like, all right, that was good, Jesus. That was good, Paul. That was good, John. We're going to change it. Little convenient. What about the generation that came after the apostolic fathers? Well, you already have the apostolic fathers agreeing with Trinitarian thought. Do they have the precise vocabulary down yet? No, but the thought behind it was there. The tension between 3 and 1 was already there, especially with Irenaeus, but even you see it in Ignatius of Antioch. So this is all important. So it ends up being just a conspiracy theory. And going back to, let's say, that hairy situation, that hairy accusation put on by the feminists, that all the names were removed, all the true and absolutely 100% historical reality of the female bishops were removed because clergymen did not want there to be clergy women, and they suppressed that information. It doesn't line up with history as well, because one of the reasons is we have an extraordinarily extensive body of literature. Extraordinarily extensive. So when it comes to trying to create that argument, you have to suggest that they were able to find every piece of early church document that has a potential of having a bishop's name and remove it without being noticed, and that this is transcribed all over the Roman Empire and outside of the Roman Empire in countries as far as India, all the way up into, let's say, the Caucasus mountain ranges. And you're going to say that all this information, all these names have been removed successfully in the various languages? Yeah, that's what I call a conspiracy. Now they'll say, well, we found some images, and this is the best they can do. We found some images that it has females doing the roles of bishops, and that was from major church areas. Therefore, there was female bishops. Except during that time period, the things that we see that these female carvings doing are all roles for deacons. And I'm not saying God doesn't have his role for women inside the church, but it's never been the bishop, at least historically, at least according to, if you look at the original authorial intent of the Bible. I'm sorry, egalitarians, it's just not there. It's not there in the timeline. It's not there in history. And yes, deacons, but it's never been bishops, except even in fringe groups. And a third is like, another group is, you have those that once again attack Constantine. And they do so because they're trying to find a convenient scapegoat. And this is something the Seventh-day Adventists do. They will attack Constantine and basically say that he was the one that changed the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday. And that Roman paganism slipped in at that time period, and everything went off the hook, and they stopped celebrating the feasts at this time period. And you also have the dietary restrictions removed, except every single church father prior to that that brings it up, that addresses what day they keep in observance, says Sunday. And you have Christians that are just speaking matter of the fact about this. It's not like they're trying to be persuasive necessary. They're just speaking matter of fact, like the epistle to Dionysius. He basically just saying, yeah, we have similar customs to those that are around us in our community, and kind of indicates that they're not keeping kosher. And this is an apostolic father. This is someone that wrote extraordinarily early. And some are even more direct, basically saying, no, we celebrate on Sunday and not Saturday. And you get this very strong historical element that it's always been on Sunday, never on Saturday. And so I don't actually mind, though, if you keep the Sabbath or the feasts or kosher. Just don't tell me that's what the main, the whole group of Orthodox Christians were doing at that time. They weren't. It's not historical in the least. And the only way to do that is to basically create this massive conspiracy that people went back in the timeline to change it, which was not what they did. They usually basically, if they disagreed with the work, they just stopped transmitting it. They stopped copying it down. Yes, there was things that they would burn, like they burned some of Origen's work. They've burned a lot of that stuff, but they weren't changing it. And that's one of the reasons why I believe that we can trust the Trinity, because Origen, when speaking on the Trinity, he gets it wrong. And his stuff wasn't changed. It was just not transmitted. And that's kind of the hallmark of something that is being suppressed. Is something they're not suppressing it in terms of changing. They're suppressing it in the sense of no longer transmitting or writing it down for study and use. But the benefit is we've discovered so much of that material that was no longer transmitted. And we have it. And a lot of it's right there. And so we know what was there. We know what the bishops had, because Irenaeus speaks to a lot of bishops. Eusebius speaks to a lot of bishops. So that's one of the ways that you can garner and make sure. Now, when it comes to, let's say, the idea of keeping Sabbath and keeping the feasts, there were some groups that did stay kosher and that kept the dietary restrictions and stayed to a certain extent under the Old Testament covenant. Yet these groups were usually strictly Jewish and often denied the deity of Jesus Christ. So that's the problem. As soon as you start saying, yes, this happened, this was there in the first century, and then you look at the other theology that was wrapped up around these groups, you're like, I kind of actually want to separate myself from that group because they were not orthodox. So if you're denying certain aspects of one group and yet agreeing with another that are disagreeing, you're basically just looking at history and picking and choosing what you want and deciding for yourself rather than reading history. It does not mean you have to actually agree with everything the early church fathers said. I certainly don't, but I have reasons for the things that I do believe and reasons for the things that I don't, because I've taken the time to study it, to read it, to understand and realize who is a more authoritative voice in terms of a writer than another. Because here's the thing, not everyone carries the same weight. I'll give you an example. I was having a conversation with one of my seminary professors on the early church, and he did something that a lot of people do. When you bring up a practice that they disagree with, they'll say, well, the early church, they said a lot of dumb things. And that was his way of dismissing it. Well, yeah, there was a few early church fathers that said some dumb things. But do I dismiss an entire generation of writers because there was a few of them that said some dumb things? Professor, that's kind of starting to sound like a dumb thing. Does that mean I don't get to listen to you because you said one dumb thing? You see how that's a pretty bad argument. You have to understand who someone is, what their tradition is, and where they're at in terms of their belief, because different church fathers come from different traditions, and identifying that is going to help you recognize how trustworthy they were on certain subjects and how not trustworthy. And like professors today, they're going to have some things that they're just excellent on and other things they're not very good at all. So realizing you can weigh people out in the different things. Now, finally, to the point of, were there some bad perversions that did take place in the early church? Well, I did say there was. And it's not the Trinity. That's not one of them. It's not Christmas. It's not the changing of the covenants or whatever that is. And it's not suppressing female clergymen. I mean, women. It's other things, such as you have the change from a very premillennial church to a very much an amillennial church. That was a change. But the thing is, we have the stuff written down. We know where it is in the written record, so we can actually watch the transition take place over hundreds of years. We know how it was introduced through Platonic thought in the city of Alexandria, and how that started to take root and change and slowly infiltrate the church. We see the written record. Because here's the thing. When there is a major change in church policy, they talk about it. They do. Yes, they do. They did not like changing things. In fact, it was very bad to change and to alter and to mix things up, specifically in ancient Roman cultures. You wanted to be traditional. You wanted to establish. And there was an oral tradition of the church called the rule of faith. And so in order to change a doctrine or something, you would be having to compete with that rule of faith. And a lot of traditions would fight against that. Let me give an example. In the 2nd century, you have this controversy taking place between those that want to celebrate the Passover or Easter, Pascha, on the 14th of Nisan, and or those that want to do the tradition that is now held today, which is it's celebrating on a Sunday that is close to Easter. And this controversy divided the church. Now, the thing is, both of these traditions were very early and probably were established from the beginning. You have in Asia Minor and in Alexandria the practice of celebrating on Passover the resurrection. However, in the West and in other parts of Rome, they would celebrate on the Sunday, on Resurrection Day. This had a huge amount of controversy, and it was written down. So it was a scandal, but it was a disagreement, and one side won out and the other side didn't. But we know when it took place. We know where it took place, and we know that these were old traditions, and there was a lot of people that had something to say about it. Why? Because their goal was not to deviate from an old tradition. That was considered bad. So usually when there was theological innovation, it would take a long time. It was a slow process over time, and we can witness this process in the historical texts. So we don't have to rely on these weird conspiracy theories that the early church fathers were heretics, but rather they were people of their time, in the culture of their time, with certain presuppositions that were worldly pushing on them, but we can often see those presuppositions in play. And that's my point. when it comes to the accusations against the early church, you have to look at it case by case. Often, those that are accusing the early church of corrupting the Christianity and tainting it usually are doing so because they're trying to get around written history. They're trying to justify why their doctrine that is on the fringe of orthodoxy is not accepted by Christianity. And the only way to do that is to create a conspiracy theory. We should not give into wild conspiracy theories, but realistically embrace the history of the church. Doesn't mean we don't have to agree to all of it, but we can't ignore it and plugging our ears and saying, "Nuh-uh, that didn't happen. No, that is foolish and anti-intellectual and something that you should avoid. So with that said, hopefully this helps you understand biblical Christianity and its historical implications, and that the fact that the early church fathers are most likely not corrupt in the way that those that make accusations against them say it is. Now, if you found this video helpful and you want to hear more content on early church history or any other subject, please subscribe and become a part of this channel. I'm hoping that it's helpful, especially because I'm going to try to refute some, as what I call YouTube heretics eventually, because there's a lot of YouTube heretics out there and they need some refuting. So, my name is Daniel Donahue. Thanks for stopping by.